I don't believe men were created to be pawns in someone else's game. I believe we were created to be steward kings. Men under authority, yes, but entrusted with real responsibility. Not perfect men, but disciplined ones. Men who rule themselves, serve God directly, and refuse to live in fear. This is king, not pawn. There's moments in history where the majority is not just mistaken, but it's completely misaligned with God. And this is going to be a little bit of a harsher video, okay? Because the culture is not just partially off, it's not slightly drifting, okay? It's just completely wrong. And in those moments, truth, it doesn't exactly look all that popular. It looks isolated. It looks like, one man standing against a system that has convinced everyone else that it's right. There's a moment in scripture that should sober up every man. Okay, this is when Elijah stands on Mount Carmel. One man against 850 prophets, 450 prophets of Baal, 400, I'm sorry, prophets of Asherah. 850 voices all saying one thing, and then one man, Elijah, saying another. Now think about that. If you were standing there, who would look more convincing? The 850 or that one? See, majority has never been proof of truth, despite everything that the media, false prophets, would tell you today. Okay? So imagine yourself being Elijah in that moment, surrounded, outnumbered, every voice around you reinforcing the same narrative. Baal is God. This is the way. You're the one who's in the wrong. That pressure doesn't just exist in ancient Israel. What if I told you it exists right now? There are these modern prophets. Today, the 850, they don't wear robes. Okay, they hold microphones. They build platforms, they create narratives. Of course, if it's not so obvious already, I'm talking about influencers, personalities, voices with literally millions of people listening to them. And honestly, many of them are not speaking the truth. They are speaking what sells, what gains attention, what grows an audience, what builds income, not what aligns with God. Because there comes a point where influence replaces integrity. Here's the danger, okay? Once a man builds a platform, or a woman for that matter, there is a pressure to maintain it, to keep engagement high, to keep followers happy, to keep the brand intact, and slowly, truth becomes negotiable. It's not abandoned outright per se, it's just adjusted, it's softened a little bit, it's framed differently, because losing truth, it might cost you your soul, but losing influence costs you your lifestyle. And unfortunately, so many choose influence. I think of Jesus and the Pharisees, okay? Jesus, he confronted this directly. The Pharisees, they were not outsiders, okay? They were religious leaders. They knew scripture, they held authority, they looked righteous, and yet Jesus says, you clean the outside of the cup, but inside you are full of greed and self-indulgence, Matthew 23:25. That's not a gentle correction, okay? That is exposure. So look, go ahead and imagine for a moment a man who speaks well. Could be somebody that quotes scripture, leads publicly, commands respect. Everything about him looks aligned, but behind closed doors, different habits, different language, different priorities. Public righteousness for sure, but private compromise. And that's exactly what Jesus was confronting. Not ignorance, hypocrisy. And this is where we need to talk about the fear of man versus the fear of God, because this is where everything comes together. The fear of man lays a snare, but whoever trusts in the Lord is safe. I know I've, talked and used this verse before. It's Proverbs 29:25. The fear of man says you protect your image, okay? You maintain your reputation. Don't lose your audience. Don't upset people. The fear of God is much different, though, because it says speak truth, live rightly, stay aligned, even if it costs you everything, because you cannot serve both. Elijah, he didn't negotiate. He didn't try to blend in, okay? He didn't say, well, maybe there's some truth on both sides. He didn't soften the message to avoid conflict. He simply stood. And he stood alone when it was necessary, because his allegiance was not to the crowd, it was to God. Okay? And I want to talk about this too because it's something that I'm seeing way too much of these days and it has to be called out. It's modern grifting in the name of truth. Because let's be honest, there are voices today, and I'm sure that there are a couple of them popping into your head at this very moment, okay, that are building entire platforms on narratives that are only partially true. Enough truth to sound convincing, but enough distortion to stay profitable. See, these are the types of people that are just telling people what they want to hear, not actually what they need to hear. Why? Because truth costs. Comfort, unfortunately, sells. I'm going to go ahead and tell you guys about a moment personal to me that you guys can probably relate to. But it's where you're listening to something and you know that just something feels off, not completely wrong, but also not fully right either. And you feel the tension. I know at least I have, where I think to myself, it's like, do I question this? Do I just go along with it? Or do I risk standing apart? That moment is where discernment actually begins. And something I want to talk about too, kind of going off of that, is reputation versus character. Okay, I was having a great conversation with my mentor the other day about this. Here's the core issue. Many men, they're focused on building reputations. Very few are actually focusing on building character. Reputation, okay, that's what people think you are. Character is what you are when no one else is watching. Reputation, that can be managed, right? Character is revealed, and over time, one will really expose the other. And Jesus, he didn't protect his image whatsoever. He didn't manage perception. He didn't adjust his truth to maintain any form of approval. He didn't soften his words to even keep his own followers. In fact, at times, his words caused people to leave, and he let them, because truth matters more than numbers. Now, here's the thing. I got to go over this with you. It's the danger of following voices blindly. As men today, we consume content constantly, podcasts, clips, reels, messages, and many, we never stop to ask, is this aligned with God, or just, does this sound good? See, discernment, it requires slowing down the pace a little bit, testing what you hear, measuring it against Scripture, not measuring it against popularity. And this is where I call you to look inward, okay? Because it's easy to watch this and think about others, the influencers, the leaders, the system. But the real question is personal. So I ask you, are you living in alignment? Or are you just managing perception to those around you? So I want to ask you this. Who are you when no one else is watching? When there's no audience, no approval, no recognition. Do your private actions actually match your public words? Or are they different? See that gap right there, that space between who you present yourself to be and who you actually are, that's where the truth lives. Elijah stood. Jesus confronted. Elijah stood alone against 850 false prophets. Jesus confronted the most powerful religious system of his time. Both were outnumbered. Both were opposed. Neither of them compromised. Because truth does not require majority. It requires alignment. We're living in a time of loud voices. No doubt about it. Strong opinions, massive platforms. But truth is not measured by volume. It is measured by alignment with God. Okay, so don't be impressed by the numbers. Don't be controlled by reputation. Don't follow voices blindly. And most importantly, examine yourself. Are you the same man in private that you present yourself to be in public? Because God is not looking for polished images. He is looking for aligned hearts. And the man who fears God more than man will always stand, even if he stands alone.